Hello and welcome to episode 458 of Retro Encounter, RPG fans' bi-weekly podcast of many topics, usually of the retro variety. And I am your host today, Zach Wilkerson, and we're here today to talk about Suikoden, which is a surprise to no one who's listened to this podcast for a long time. I like Suikoden, so we get some new remasters. I'm just going to use that as an excuse to talk about more Suikoden. But before I pop off about all the reasons I love Suikoden, and we're going to be talking about Suikoden 1 specifically, let's go ahead and introduce the panel, starting with you, Aleks.
Hello, hello.
And Paul Dennis.
Hi.
Rob.
Hello.
And Kyle.
Greetings, 108 stars of Destiny.
More like 5 stars of Destiny.
Yeah, we're pretty early on in the game right now, but
we're one short of a full party, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, that's like we have Gremio in the party, so we're basically we're the same.
Dead weight.
So useless. Anyway, so again, like I said, we're here to talk about Suikoden 1. If I'm not mistaken, we all played the remaster, and we'll talk a little bit about the remasters, but for the most part, we're just going to be talking about Suikoden. We've already had game journals on it, so this is not going to be a full-blown two-parter game journal on Suikoden, just sort of our general impressions, vibes about this initial game, things we love about it, things that maybe we don't love about it, like the inventory system. And we'll just talk through it. So yeah, that's a whole lot of me awing through the beginning here, which I will edit. So before we get into talking about Suikoden, we have a lot of different sort of experience levels with Suikoden, the Suikoden series. Some of us have played the games a dozen times. Some of us are playing it for the first time. So I want to get a little bit about our history and background on the series and this game in particular before we dive in. So we'll start with you, Rob. What's your history with the Suikoden series and this game in particular?
Sure. So my first game was the second one. And I was actually thinking earlier, like, what it was that made me want to play it back when I was, 13 or something. And I think, like, at that time, I can't really remember if we even had a computer in our house. I'm not sure. We probably did, but the internet was terrible anyway at that point. So I think it must have just been the fact that I'd seen the game in game shops, and I remember really, really loving the watercolor kind of anime sort of hand-drawn art style of the cover.
And you didn't like the cover of Suikoden 1, at least in America, it was terrible.
Well, I had never seen the actual game of Suikoden 1 anywhere. The second one was the first one that I ever saw. So, I think I must have just seen it in shops. And I remember at that point, I was literally just wanting to play absolutely anything that was a turn-based RPG. So I picked it up and I just totally fell in love with it. And even now, I would say that the second one is easily in my top 5, possibly in my top 3 games of all time, but I'd have to think about it. So I played the second one. The third one never released in Europe. The first one, I think I must have just missed. I think it did come out here, but I don't think I had a games console maybe at the time. And then 4 and 5 I did play and really enjoyed both of those. And then, I think when I saw the remaster was announced, I was really excited. I would have been just as excited if it was just the second one. But the fact that it also is the first game too was really, really great. And it's basically been my most anticipated game for like the last 5 years or however long it's been since it was announced. I really enjoyed playing the first one. It's definitely been interesting playing it after having played the second one and knowing the second one very well. So we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I'll go into my history here in a second. It's interesting that I think that playing like 2 and then 1 is in some ways just as satisfying as playing 1 then 2, just because they're so interlocked and they're so connected. And I always sort of think of them as like, 2 sides of the same coin. But I will go through my history with the series very quickly because I have litigated it on this podcast many times. But I played Suikoden 1 before Suikoden 2, probably 97. It was after I played Final Fantasy 7, and I was just looking for any turn-based RPG that was available on the PS1, and there weren't a lot at the time. because the influence of 7 sort of exploding that market hadn't quite hit yet. And so I played Suikoden 1, and I remember, liking it, enjoying it, but I didn't play it with a guide, so I didn't get all the stars, and I beat it, and I didn't think much of it. But then Suikoden 2 came out, and I was just enraptured with it. So I played through it, and I was like, wait a second, I can't get the protagonist from the first one. So then I played through it. I don't think I got all 108, and then I went back and I played Suikoden 1 immediately so that I could carry over my save file to Suikoden 2. And it turns out that you actually didn't have to have all 108 Stars of Destiny to get the protagonist, but oh well, I didn't know that at the time. And it's just sort of gone from there. I have been a Suikoden fan for a long time, even in my early 20s through my late 20s, when I wasn't playing a lot of RPGs. Like when a new Suikoden game came out, like I was playing that one immediately. And so I played 3 when it came out, I played 4 when it came out, I played 5. I've even played Tierkreis, which I don't love. But, I've gone back to Suikoden 1 and 2 so many times. And I may have replayed Suikoden 1 more times than I've played Suikoden 2 just because it's so short. Like, if you know what you're doing in this game, you can knock it out in less than 10 hours. And so I just a huge fan of the series, and we'll get into all the reasons why in a little bit here. But Aleks, I know that your history with the series is much different from mine. So why don't you talk to us about your history?
Yeah, so I think I've admitted this on the podcast before, but I've considered Suikoden 2 like my great RPG blind spot because I just never got around to playing it despite pretty much growing up on like SNES and PS1 RPGs, and everything I knew about Suikoden 2 and its reputation just made me really, really want to play it. I remember even buying it on PSN for the PS3, but then I found out that, oh no, you should play the first game first because they like blend so well together like you were describing. And I'm just like, and then the remasters got announced some like 5 years or something ago, and then I'm just like, oh, I might as well wait for them to come out now. And so now they're finally out and I finally get to play the games. I did actually play one Suikoden game when I was growing up, and that was Suikoden 3, which for my 10 probably year old brain at the time was a lot to handle. I thought that game was really, really cool in terms of like
crazy.
its multiple storylines and things like that. I remember being blown away by a lot of the storytelling, and then just completely lost when it came to like combat and character building and all that going on. So that was my first impression of the series, and it was overall strong, but also I was too much of a stupid kid to get the most out of it. And so now I'm just like really happy to finally get to explore these two games and see more of what the series is all about. And while I'm not done 2, it's already definitely coming out as the superior game. That much is evident. But Suikoden 1 is, for its time, an early PS1 game. Has some cool ideas, has some cool things going on that I'm sure we'll get into.
Absolutely. And Paul, I think you're a little closer to me in terms of your experience. Why don't you talk us through your experience with the series?
Yeah, I was introduced to Suikoden 1 because of my babysitter's son, who was like significantly older than me, and he showed me the part in Linen Camp where Victor saves you, and I was like sold, and like I was like obsessed with Victor or whatever. And but that was the last time I ever saw the game, or well, it was the last time I saw the game for years. But I had that name, I had the name Suikoden stuck in my head, and so when I found it at like some of you younger folks are not familiar with this, but you used to be able to rent video games. And I rented it, and I rented it over and over and over again, Suikoden 2. And eventually I was able to buy it from them. I don't know what happened to that copy, but and then, Suikoden 1, I came across in a grocery store. There was this really small display.
That's funny.
And it had a bunch of games that were like, they were like generic or whatever, like not a part of like an established series or anything like that. And they all look really stupid. But the one that looked the most stupid to me was Suikoden 1. I was just staring at the case and I was like, this looks dumb.
The cover is so bad for the American one.
Real bad. Like, who are any of those people? The most accurate thing on it is there's like a monster on the bottom right, and it's like a dead ringer for the actual monster in the game. But then I realized it was Suikoden. I saw the title at the top, and I like begged my mom to buy it for me, and she did. But like that was years after I played Suikoden 2, and that was like a game that I used to escape into because things weren't great back then, and I would play that game nonstop with all of my free time for years, and And then when I found 1, it was cool, because playing 1 after 2, it I think that I found that I enjoy playing sequels first, or rather I enjoy prequels a lot. And so having some like gaps in context filled in for me was really cool. And Suikoden 2 is still my favorite, but I love Suikoden 1 as well. But I would have to put 5, which I played in my adulthood, emulated. I played that, and I would say 5 is the second best in the series. And then I'm so surprised, Alex, that you as a kid were able to get through Suikoden 3, because the only thing that's not a fun game. The only thing that kept me going through that, which I also played in my adulthood, was the fact that it was Suikoden, and I knew it was the most chronologically recent entry in the series. And then I played 4, and that was even more painful. But I still love these games. I still love all of them, and I love how sort of big the universe is, how intertwined the stories in different regions are and over time and stuff. And Suikoden was actually that love for a long series that is following one story is what got me into Trails. And I've played every Trails game so far. So, but yeah, no, I love it. I absolutely adore this series. And I remember when the remake was announced, or the remaster was announced, I was watching the videos, and I started crying on the toilet. It was the morning before work. I started crying on the toilet. All they had shown was the new background for Outside of Muse, Waiting for Joey, and then the new background for the waterfall. And I was like, holy shit, this is gorgeous. So I was really excited about that. And I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Yeah. Awesome. And Kyle, you're last up.
Well, I don't know how to follow that. I don't remember being on the toilet playing.
You didn't cry on the toilet?
I didn't cry on the toilet, no. You know what? I have so much in common with everybody's what they've said so far about their history. I often feel pretty outmatched when I get together with the meetings of the minds on these podcasts, and rightfully so. But if there's a niche where I might be able to hold my own, it is the Suikoden universe, and it might not be all that close. I've played the series 1 through 5 plus Suikoden Tactics about as many different ways as you can, from randomed ADHD random jumbled up order to my favorite, which is chronologically 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. 4 tactics, 5, 1, 2, 3. And like Paul said, the some of the through lines that you notice when you play them that way, a bunch of people have suggested the little bits of context that get cemented the more you play, and the more little references you catch. I would equate it, like Paul said, to the Trail series, but it's also to all those Marvel fans out there that just love all those weird little nuggets that you pick up every time you rewatch a really long series of shows or movies. Suikoden has those, whether it's just the way a name is dropped, or your save file carryover, and the thing you named your army that one time. All those things just combine to create this universe that is just so wholesome. I've anytime I'm on a podcast, I talk about how I love sort of things like team building, and to have 6 characters was really unique, and still is for a turn-based RPG. To have that many people on screen to control and to tinker with, and their formations and all those things, and that differs throughout the series, but it starts in 1, and it's just it's a really special set of games that I've played at essentially every major inflection point of my life, from teenage years to early 20s and moving away from home for the first time, to any other different things you can think about happening in adulthood. I've always kind of revisited the series every few years, and it holds a really special place for me personally, and I couldn't be more excited to talk through the first one today with my five other stars.
Yeah, I mean, I think that your story probably most closely mirrors mine, Kyle, and I agree with everything you said. I don't think I've ever actually done a chronological playthrough, because I think I've only played Suikoden 4 once, and I've done 3 twice, and the second time through, I was like, okay, I'm going to like it better this time. And then I didn't still, because the game is so slow. But we are not here to talk about Suikoden 3. We're here to talk about the thing that sort of created the baseline, and slow is definitely not Suikoden 1's problem. So from a broad perspective, Suikoden. So as we've sort of hinted at, those of you who are listening and maybe don't know a lot about these games, they're, for the most part, Suikoden 1 through 5, and then Tactics at least, all take place in the same universe. They all sort of, take place within like 165 years of each other ish, I think, if you're thinking about 4 to 3. And it's every single game, it usually has some sort of a political conflict, whether it's a conflict that you have with, and there's a personal stakes in those conflicts. So whether it's you and your best friend sort of facing off with each other, or in this game, it is you facing off against the empire that your father is a general for. And there are these 27 true runes, and sort of steadily throughout the series, we start getting more and more of these true runes. The new mobile game that's about to come out is going to focus on the rune of change, which is all about the Sindar, which is very cool. And it really is the way that, like, these sort of like there'll be these mysteries sort of hanging out there, like. And they're all sort of established here. Like, who is Vicky? Like, what's going on with her? She's probably always the same age and just kind of blinking back and forth in time. Jean is this big mystery. And I love how they sort of create the baseline here for some of these mysteries that you don't really realize until later how they're going to get picked up. But I think that they do a great job of that here.
I will say, if you haven't, Zach, played it chronologically, that type of thing you're talking about really does get rewarded. It's really interesting to play them chronologically and see some of those mysteries evolve narratively.
Yeah.
Because production wise, obviously they would have had to kind of go back and be like, okay, where are we at with this, and how do we want to build this up? Even just like something simple like in 4 and 5, Jean's a playable character, and then in 1, 2, and 3 she's not.
Yeah, it's always interesting,
right? And so I would highly recommend anybody who has experienced or wants to experience the Suikoden universe. I highly recommend the chronological playthrough for the reason that you just said, because it really plays with those mysteries and through lines quite well, I think.
Yeah, there's references in 5 to stuff in 4. Like there's like a ship named after the king that you meet towards the beginning of Suikoden 4, Lino and Kuldis or something like that. I can't remember his name. Maybe I do remember his name. I don't know.
Yeah, the Island Nation guy.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
And and like I think that the geography of the series is just like, if you play it in chronological order, is just north. It like just drifts north and then a little bit to the west constantly, like on the world map. And so that's also pretty cool. But I never finished Tactics, so I don't know where all you go there. But I do know it takes place in the same general areas for. But yeah, I also think that a chronological playthrough is a really cool idea.
Yeah, we're sort of like steadily moving towards Harmonia, right? Which I don't want to get too far into the weeds on all that stuff. But I'm curious, Aleks, as a person who doesn't sort of have that sort of large scope knowledge of what Kyle, Paul, and I in particular maybe have here. How does the storytelling feel to you in the early going? Does it feel like they're sort of setting those seeds, or does it feel like what is your initial impressions of the storytelling here?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting to just listen to you three talk about all these greater connections and world building that the series manages as a whole in the long run, because as someone who basically only has the knowledge of Suikoden 1, the beginning of Suikoden 2, and a really vague recollection of Suikoden 3, I'm just like, this is like a quaint little RPG. Very, very kind of like mild, very wholesome in kind of its ambitions. But that's really what my main impression of it is just it's not really super big in terms of narrative scope and things like that. It's like economic in terms of its game design and storytelling. The dialogue you do get from like the core 6 characters at the very beginning is not extensive at all. You don't get a ton of understanding of this larger world, but with all that said, like what this game manages on this kind of smaller scale is pretty successful. It actually reminded me quite a bit of my favorite RPG, FF6, in some ways, which just came out a year before this, in terms of how much it manages to do with its characterization with pretty minimal dialogue and just like really nice like character portraits and designs. In that sense, like I thought it just did a great job like introducing me to a greater like political conflict with like a little core cast that has like these different personalities and relationships with each other. But all this larger stuff doesn't feel like foreshadowed in a way, at least to me, with my minimal knowledge of the series. But still, just like the game manages to have a unique identity of its own in these kind of just opening hours, just doing what I've just been describing.
Well, like, okay, so how far are you in 2?
I am like I've lost Joey already.
Okay.
And
But you don't have.
I'm basically
have the
just at the
detective
point
thing?
where it's just like I have the castle and I'm being prompted to hire more people, basically.
Okay,
Oh, that's
so
that's the best part of every Suikoden game.
there is a detective dude that you meet, and you can use him to like look into the background of characters, but you can also use him to like figure out how to recruit other characters. And there's a guy named George Prime that you recruit at the end of 2. And if you investigate him, I think it's the 3rd one, it says that he is from like a far off country or whatever, and he can't go back there because he killed the queen. But then in 5, which deals with that, there is like it reveals that George was the 6th of the 5 great generals that you fight in Suikoden 1. And so like there's a lot of stuff that doesn't seem like foreshadowing, doesn't seem like setup, but they just like brilliantly expound upon like details that seem small. Like an entire game is based off of just a Richmond investigation into George Prime, and it is incredible. The series is real good at that.
Okay, hold on, back up. You just blew my mind. Say that part again about George and Suikoden 1.
Well, so George is not in Suikoden 1. He's in Suikoden
Right.
2, and he so like he is a main character in Suikoden 5.
Yeah.
And in Suikoden 5, I can't remember if it's, I think after Suikoden 5, he leaves Falena,
He does,
the country that takes place in, and he ends up being one of the 6 great generals that fought in the Succession War with Barbarossa, who is the emperor of the Scarlet Moon Empire. And he left there to go north to the Joustin Republic. And so he was one of the 6 generals, like Milich and Sonya, and he was one of them. But
it's sick.
Yeah, it's true story. I didn't know that until like a couple weeks ago, and so it's just really interesting the way that they create that sort of rich tapestry, and they can kind of pull like this one thread, and even after Murayama leaves, they still manage to sort of understand how to pull those different threads, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. 5 was an entirely different team, and it was a great game.
Mm-hmm. So I think that one of the things that to me always defines Suikoden, and Suikoden 1 I think does a great job of establishing that template. We kind of talk a little bit more about the story proper, I think, at this point, is getting to one of Alex's points about this game is the way that it has these sort of very personal. I think the reason that all this still works with the lack of dialogue and things like that is because we have these personal stakes immediately, right? Like at the very beginning, you're introduced to these 5 people and a dad, and like it sort of makes the stakes personal in these like large political conflicts immediately clear. And so even when we don't spend a lot of time with Tio, we know what father-son relationships are like. And even like in a very economical way, I think that relationship that ends up sort of getting established between, Tur and Tio and Tur and his father are really interesting. So what are some of the highlights of the storytelling here for you guys? Some things that you really liked about it? We haven't heard much from you yet, Rob, and I apologize. We've kind of been bouncing around here. So what are some of your thoughts on the storytelling here?
I think it's fine. I think for me, because obviously I have a lot more experience with 2, I was playing 1 kind of comparing it a lot to the second game. And for me, I found the story kind of almost like a first draft, I felt like, or like a prototype for the second game. I feel like overall it kind of shares a lot of similar kind of plot points. It kind of tries to go for similar kind of moments that are going to like shock you or make you feel something. But I think the problem with the storytelling in the first game is the speed in which it's delivered. And I think it doesn't really give you much time, or for me anyway, I felt like it didn't give me much time to kind of get to know the characters particularly well. I felt like the kind of, like with the second game, I think there's a lot more kind of space to build like tension and mystery, and for the story to just kind of build, so that when you have these moments like a main character dying or being killed, it feels like it has weight. And in the first game, I didn't really feel like it gave me that kind of emotional impact in the same way. But saying that, like, the story is certainly not bad. I found it interesting, and I liked like where it took me. I think for me, the kind of main sort of issue I had with it was the speed that it was being delivered. Like, even in terms of character development, I think at the beginning of the game, you're kind of dropped in with this core group of people that already feel like they're kind of fully developed characters, like their relationships are already kind of established, and they don't really change much, I don't think, for the entire game. And I think the characters in the first game definitely come with sort of secondary to the main political storyline. And I think when you move into Suikoden 2, it feels like they're kind of trying to balance it a bit better and give the character development and the more kind of personal stuff a bit more time to cook, I think.
Yeah, I feel like the pacing of this game is both one of its stronger qualities and one of its weaker qualities, because it like events move so quickly that it does end up feeling like, despite only being like a 15 to 20 hour game, like it feels like an epic war story in the long run, which is pretty impressive considering you're balancing like 108 characters along with like these villains and like this close knit group of characters you get at the beginning. But also like so many plot points end up feeling like contrived and lacking like emotional weight because it is moving that quickly.
I think it would be fair if somebody wanted to levy a criticism, if they just were feeling, flat about Suikoden for whatever reason. I would disagree with them. But if they wanted to call Suikoden 1 half-baked, I think that would be a fair criticism. Now, I mean, there's like a lot of important context as to why. Like, hello, it's 1996. But that's the term I keep thinking of when I hear Rob and Aleks kind of talk themselves through this. Like, I definitely think that that's a fair sort of judgment to say that they just don't extend things far enough in any direction. And then you can tell that they immediately remedy that in Suikoden 2. Like, everything is just more fleshed out, they bring back so many characters. I think it's a very fair criticism of Suikoden 1. Aleks, when you're talking about the pacing, I compare it to, so the first time I ever played the Final Fantasy remasters, the first time I ever played the original Final Fantasy games, like 1, 2, 3, 5 for sure was the remasters a couple years ago. And I remember thinking in the first 2 Final Fantasies that it was like an hour into the game and I had a boat all of a sudden. And it was just like, what is happening? Like, how do I have this much freedom of movement in the first, like, 60 minutes?
The 7 airships that you get in Final Fantasy 3.
Yeah. So I was just like, that's the first thing I thought of when you were talking about how Suikoden 1 is so strange.
Suikoden 1, in terms of pacing, like I agree with all of y'all. Like, it does seem pretty bare bones, but it is also like sometimes fun to have like a like to, digest like that much content that quickly. You know what I mean? And not necessarily that much content, but like, you get a whole game in really quickly and it's a good game and it's pretty satisfying. But 2, I think they still managed to keep things kind of minimalist, but with, I don't know, they didn't correct too far in the opposite direction, I guess is what I mean. But I remember as a kid, not being able to get through stuff. Like, I think the game was more fun when I thought it was harder, because every Suikoden has this like sequence where like you're on your heels and you're kind of on the run. And 1 it had that, but it was very brief before you get your castle and kind of dig your heels in and start making progress. The second one felt like forever to me as a kid. And so the relief of having like a home, having a castle was incredible. But knowing how to play the game that period is a little more shortened. And so, I would do anything to play this game for the first time again.
Yeah.
Sorry, you go, Alex.
I was just going to say, like, for the record, I don't even like, even though like from a narrative perspective, I feel like a lot of the pacing ends up like feeling contrived and silly. I feel like just from like a gameplay perspective and in terms of my enjoyment of the game, I actually did like that in some ways, because like when you're recruiting like the Stars of Destiny, trying to get people to join the Liberation Army, and you're just like talking to a distinct looking NPC and they're like, I'm an inventor, and you're like, want to join the Liberation Army? And they're like, Liberation Army? Yeah, why not? Like, you just end up like recruiting like people at such a nice pace that like there's like good like gameplay dopamine hits that you're getting just from like being like, oh yeah, like I remember this character, distinct looking character, I could probably recruit them, I'll go back to them now. And so like within like 20 minutes you might recruit like 3 or 4 different characters, and like there's something like nice about that actually. I found when playing the game.
Yeah, and I think like even though I think like what I was saying, kind of comparing the storytelling to the way it's done in 2, I absolutely don't think the story is bad. Like, the story is still really interesting and really well like thought out. And I really appreciated also the shortness of the game, because I think it's so rare, especially now, that you get RPGs with stories as complex as this, but told over a sort of relatively short playtime. So I did enjoy that, but also kind of thinking about what Kyle was saying about Final Fantasy. I was thinking when I was playing this game, because there's lots of races in this one that I don't think appear in any of the other Suikoden games. It's like the elves, dwarves, what else? There's the kobolds, but they do come back. And like other kind of traditional sort of fantasy, almost kind of cliche, like races and like types of characters, so like witches and things as well. And it reminded me a bit of when I played the first Final Fantasy game, which I only played properly like to the end last year, because that does a similar thing where it kind of puts all of these very traditional fantasy elements into a story, but then they don't kind of appear in the same degree in entries after that. And I first of all was wondering whether that was done as a way to kind of draw people into this, I assume what they were hoping would be a new series of game, by giving the player something that would be quite familiar and that they would recognize and kind of anchor them in quite a traditional sort of fantasy setting, before in the second one kind of ditching a lot of those. Like I'm playing the second one now, and I don't think elves have been mentioned once as far as I've seen. But also it's interesting kind of experiencing this now after playing Eiyuden Chronicle last year, which does have all of those different types of characters in again. Obviously it's they're both Murayama games, but I remember playing Eiyuden Chronicle last year and thinking, wow, this feels really different to Suikoden, because it has, like, there's elves here, which were not in Suikoden at all, as far as I was aware at that point. And that has dwarves in as well. So it's really interesting now kind of playing Suikoden, the first game, and seeing also the influences in Eiyuden Chronicle. So yeah, that's been a really kind of nice thing to experience for me as well.
Yeah, and we'll maybe talk about Eiyuden maybe in Suikoden 2 episode, but or we can touch on it if it comes up. But I think that you're onto something there in terms of like that sort of creating that grounding, and it's interesting to hear from people who don't have the history of it, because like I think the weight of the history that sort of surrounds it, I know impacts the way that I experience the story. But I still think like there are moments that work really well. Like I like the moment with Odessa at night when you're at the inn. I think is really beautiful and sort of makes Odessa this really powerful character. Like I love like the way that her presence sort of sits over the narrative in a way. And I think that she's established just enough. And I like some of the moments with Gremio in the evening, and like when Victor's introduction is one of my favorites in all of video games, where he's just like so totally unhinged and setting stuff on fire, and but I do think that like there are other moments like Gremio's death, which first of all, I'm always happy when Gremio dies because that means I don't have to have his uselessness in my party, because like they do a way better job with this in other games in the series, especially 5, where like the character you have to bring along with you is actually like broken. There's so many broken characters in 5, but like the way that the Gremio thing happens, I think that is maybe, and it's also like I don't think it's great storytelling. Like it happens so fast. It happens so quickly. I always forget, like, oh, Gremio's dead now. Like after like 30 seconds. So I just think it's interesting just to sort of think about, because for me, like, and I'm playing it like with Flick in particular, like I know so much about Flick because of Suikoden 2, so I'm invested in Flick's journey. But how much of that is what I know comes later, and how much of that is just playing the game? So you guys have made some good points about that. But I want to kind of touch on kind of pull around to something that Aleks was talking about, which is the recruiting nature of it. And I agree with you. Like, as I'm playing these games, like I don't even care about the fact that like you're recruiting people because you're just like, hey, would you join this army? And they're like, yeah, because it's like that dopamine hit, and building up that base is really satisfying. And I'm not the sort of person who wants to go make a farm in Stardew Valley. Like, it's not my jam at all. But I do love like sort of that ability to consistently build and consistently move. And so even though I think that it creates some problems with the storytelling, I love just that constant feeling of progression, and just like that feeling of movement over and over again. And I feel like that kind of even comes into like the battle system, which even with the speed up now in particular, it's really fast, but it's always been quick. Like I feel like Suikoden, from a gameplay perspective, it 1 and 2 at least really respect your time, and that's one of the reasons why 3 is not one of my favorites, because it's just like such a change of pace on that front. So I really like just like the building and the recruiting and all that is really cool to me.
Yeah, and it almost has like a nice, like after you get your castle and you start unlocking more regions, it adds like a nice bit of like non-linearity to the game as well, because like I was describing before, like you meet characters that are recruitable while you're just like kind of progressing the main story, but you're not necessarily able to recruit them yet. But you kind of make these mental notes about them as you're going through, and then you'll think of them again and be like, oh yeah, I should go back there and recruit them now. And it just like, yeah, it adds like this nice like extra bit of flavor to like the exploration, and how like everybody individually will probably go through and recruit characters in like a different order, which is definitely cool.
I would say that the nature of the recruitment in Suikoden makes the series, it allows it to reward backtracking.
Yeah, exactly.
More than pretty much any other RPG series that I have a lot of extensive experience with, right? Like, there's so many reasons to go back to that fort, that small town, that whatever, because now you do have 10,000 poch to pay that guy's food bill. I don't know what he was eating, but it was worth 10 grand, and right on. Now that guy looks really strong. He can come be part of my army. So I've always found that, and maybe that's like, kind of some of my foundational, like Suikoden helped form so much of my foundation that I've always enjoyed backtracking in RPGs. And I think that might be part of it. Recruitment slaps, man. There's two things, honestly. There's two things at Suikoden, like for as far as dopamine hits, there's two things for me that rival. I would put it up against essentially any other game, any other RPG, in any other situation. The moment you get your castle and it's just like, go recruit guys. Hell yeah, I would love to. Thank you for asking. Mm-hmm. And the moment that you eventually find Vicky or receive the blinking mirror there's just like, it's an unparalleled feeling. Like, yes, now I can go literally anywhere and it won't take forever. And
one thing I forgot about in this game this time around is that I totally forgot the blinking mirror is optional in this game. It's just like
it's in a treasure chest.
It's a treasure chest in like that lake town. Yeah. And I'm like, wait a second. I forgot. I always forget that it's optional, and it always comes a little bit later than I'd like. But
man, and never later than in 3.
Oh, I mean, let's not even get into that. But yeah,
right. Oh my god, you know what my biggest recruitment oops is I
Yes.
mentioned the inventor before, is I did not remember to go back to the inventor until like the end of the game, and man, having that elevator to take you through the castle, Jesus Christ, having to like take all those stairwell screens and just like they're all separate screens, just doing that over and over, running up and down the castle, like that was brutal. But like, yeah, like I despite the suffering I felt, like that is actually really cool. It's just like if I did get that inventor earlier on, like his recruitment would have been just a great quality of life upgrade to the game. And that makes like this character, this very like minor character in the way like he's written and stuff, feel like an important part of my overall crew, because like he is just saving me time and frustration.
I do wish he'd made that elevator go right down into the basement, though. That used to bug me. Because every time you like come back after being transported through the mirror, you then have to walk up the stairs to get to the elevator to take you. I was just like, why did you not just build it all the way down? You know.
Well, imagine having to do that through the whole castle.
In like the quickest of random asides, RPGs kind of broke my brain, because for most of my entire life, I just assumed you could install and build an elevator in 18 hours. And like, shout out to the Suikoden inventors who can just throw that stuff up like it's nothing.
Yeah, it was always amazing to me that like you just get the elevator immediately. I remember the very first time I played through the game, I think that I was in the same situation as you, Aleks. And like there's, when you're playing on the PlayStation 1, like there's like those loading screens, like you're watching those characters run. And so it makes like walking around the castle significantly more annoying than it is like in the remasters, where even on the Switch there's no load times here. And like I remember being so pissed when I got that adventure very later on. But this time, like I was annoyed that it took me forever to get. Is this the game where you need to get the Celadon urn to recruit the guy who appraises? And I feel like most of the recruitment in this game is super easy, especially compared to something like 5, where some of them are just a nightmare. And I think I had to grind for like an hour this time, and I was like, "What the hell?"
That's 2, but in this one, it used to be worse. It was easier this time for me, but like, so it's the nameless urn in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The drop rate hasn't changed, but it used to be kind of bugged, where if you went, you had to go into the town a certain number of times, or he wouldn't say it. It was just like, it was a nightmare. Like he was the appraiser in 1, was always the last character I got, and it was just sheer stubbornness. But that's going back now quite a few years.
Yeah, that was one of the more tedious recruitment ones, but at the same time, I do appreciate that there is this balance of like some characters that you actually have to do something to recruit versus others that you just talk to and they're like, yeah, Liberation Army's awesome. So yeah, definitely different qualities in terms of like how that works out, but the idea is there and it's nice.
I don't know, Zach, if you want to talk about, or when you want to talk about, like things that we kind of wish that were in a remaster, but I love Rob's, like that would have been an awesome and I'm not a programmer, I don't know how hard it would be, but to just like put the elevator all the way to the bottom would have been such a great little kind of like wink to longtime fans. Like, hey, you can take it all the way now.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things. I mean, we could talk about the remasters very briefly here, but there are a lot of things about the remasters that like are just like little annoyances that like in a 1995 game, like it wouldn't have really bothered me. Like inventory management being a pain, which is something I sort of expected at the time, right? Like it wasn't like something that I really worried about, or even when I went back to play it, I was like, okay, whatever, I just remember, and it's just annoying. But now this time I was like, what the hell? Like you guys had this opportunity, and this is going up after the embargo for Lunar, so I can say this. Like, I'm also playing like the Lunar games, and in Lunar 1, Silver Star Story Complete, like the inventory in that game was a nightmare, and they literally just gave you an option to just have a shared inventory. That's all they needed to do. It's very simple. But yeah, like the elevator thing, like the fact that you have to like hit confirm, like is a very small thing, but like it feels like that's a small thing they could have fixed. Yeah, and so yeah, there are lots of little tiny frustrations I had.
Selecting the floor inside the elevator rather than outside, they do it a little better in 2. I think
that's
they
true.
eliminate
That's
that
good. That's a good call too.
But I will say, since we're talking about the remasters, localization, I think that there really helped. We'll talk about duels in a second here, but I think that with duels in particular, like I remember when I was younger, like I would just cheat it and I would go look it up. But this time I didn't need to, like to figure out like how to respond to those things. And so I think that localization being a little more coherent, especially in 2, but I think it's also true here in 1, was also a big boon in these remasters.
Except for the one character that's completely different in name, essentially. That really threw me for a loop.
Glen Seal or something. It's one of Tio's underlings.
Glen Shield. There's a mod for the PC version that fixes the name, it makes it Grenziel again in Suikoden 1, but it doesn't work for Suikoden 2, and I just found that out.
That's weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, did you guys have any other thoughts on the remasters before we move to talking about combat?
I wish they had fixed the inventory system. I don't know how bad it was in the original version of the game.
It was the same level of bad.
Like, have they changed it at all, or is it exactly the same?
I think that the only thing they adjusted, and I think that they may have done this in a patch after I played it, is they let you compare stats on equipment from the inventory, and that was not true when I played it. And I think that like the ability to flip between characters in the equipment screen is also added. Yeah. So there are some tiny things they added, but not anything too significant.
I was going to say, like, it is actually better. Like the remaster version is better. It is noticeably better than the original, but it is still exactly what you guys are saying. It's still lackluster.
For me, the nicest like inventory change that they made in the remasters was that the blinking mirror goes into a key item like inventory in 1 rather than sitting in your character's inventory. Yep. Yeah. Because that you could put that in like some random person's inventory and then they're not in your party, or worse, they're like not allowed to be in your party and you can't get it back for a while.
That character just leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely some rough parts of things like that happening.
Yeah.
But from a visual angle, I thought I was like a little bit mixed on the changes they made. Like the new backgrounds and assets like looked a little cheap to me, and I thought clashed kind of awkwardly with the sprite work. Like it kind of looked like an RPG Maker game, and I really didn't like it at first, but I did end up getting used to it, and I think at this point, I'm okay with like the way this game looks and the changes that they made. But on a more positive note, like the redrawn character designs, I went back to look at like those old character designs, and some of them were whack. And
so weird.
these new ones are really nice. I don't know if this is sacrilege, but I think I prefer the redrawn Suikoden 1 character portraits to the Suikoden 2 ones for the most part, even.
Yeah, it's tricky, I think. I've been thinking about this quite a bit since I started playing 2, because I really love the character portraits in the second game, but it does kind of bug me that they don't match the portraits from the first one, just in like the style of the artwork, I guess. And I'm not sure which I would prefer, whether I would prefer to kind of keep the artwork that already exists within 2, or whether I would prefer them to match, because I like both.
I'm really not sure. Like, so Junko Kawano was the one who drew the character portraits in the first game, but I don't know who drew them in the second game.
It was Kawano, I believe, for both, if I'm not mistaken.
I
could be wrong.
So, but okay. I'm not super confident. But it is a little weird that the style doesn't match between the two of them, right? Like, I mean, if it was Junko Kawano that did the second game, you'd think that they would match. And I'm not using that as like evidence to argue with you or whatever. I'm just saying, like, I also think it is kind of weird that they don't match. And I think it is especially weird that they don't match after they were given the opportunity to do the game again and make them match. Is just kind of a weird choice. But I can also see why some people would be like, oh, these aren't as good as the old portraits and I don't like them. But, you still have the old game to play and it looks great. So like, this is just sort of a bonus option, the remasters. And so, doesn't bother me too much either way.
I want to agree with Alex. I was really kind of almost put off in a way, I think, when Like I really actually quite like the new backgrounds, but it really was weird that it felt like the sprites were still kind of super pixely, and it just was this really strange contrast that took me a while to get used to. Like Aleks, I still did and came to appreciate it for what it is, but it really, I expected it. I think maybe this is a me problem though. Like I expected it almost to look like you did, where it was just like super smooth sprites, but that's probably a me problem. I also want to draw just special attention to the character Kimberly, who, for my money, her original portrait is like unintelligible. Like I don't know if that's a human in the original portrait. It looks like like a. Has anyone seen the Jim Carrey Grinch movie?
Yes.
The lady who's a little salacious in that movie, the Who lady, that's exactly who Kimberly looks like in her original game portrait. And if you don't believe me, please, if you're listening to this, look it up and put them side by side, because this is not a human person. And I was always just like, what is happening with this portrait? And the new one, I was like, okay, now she looks at least like a human, and I can deal with this. Not that I'm against who's or humans. It's just like, it just seems so incongruent with what they were trying to present. And it's just so bizarre. So yeah, big shout out to Kimberly.
You know, I hadn't even thought about that, but you're 100% right. I think also like the Crowley, like one of those like that last mage that you recruit, like the original portrait art in that was totally like, I was like, this is just like a blob of something sitting there. And like, it turns out in the redrawn one, like, oh, it was supposed to kind of look like that, but like still, at least I can tell that there's a human under that robe now.
I didn't know that Freed Y, who I call Freedy, I didn't know he was saluting in his portrait until I played the remaster, and I have like over 1,000 hours. And
oh man, there's so many great little things like that. I love that you said that. That's amazing. Okay. Here's another kind of small good one like that. I didn't know LePant had a mustache.
That was a very, very bronze man. It was like, it was a very warm portrait. I don't think I knew he had a mustache either, but it looks good on him. You know, but the original portraits were like, I wonder what the limitation was. You know, they were really pixelated, really kind of noisy. You know.
Yeah, I totally knew, like when I was playing it, I was like I'm guessing there's going to be like one or two people out there who are like, I really want the original portraits back, but like I didn't think there would be many because they're so freaking weird, and just like dull, and just like, I don't know, they're odd. So that's a change that I'm glad they made. But one thing that I wasn't sure what they were going to do with was some of the combat stuff. So like obviously the combat itself, the 6-person battles, which I think is really cool, and the fact that when you fire off multiple attacks, they hit multiple different things, and that's still the same, and that's great. And the speed up is good, even though the music speeding up is weird, but apparently they're going to patch that to change it by the time most people listen to this. But like the army battles were always like sort of a fascinating thing to me as a kid. Like I remember when I was a kid, I really struggled with those army battles because I just like didn't understand how easy it was to break it, especially with like the ninjas, which basically just like totally eviscerates any challenge that it would have. But I think it's interesting that like they give you these 3 different combat modes, and like I remember at the time just being blown away by it. And even in retrospect now, just thinking about that compared to other games at the time was really cool. But I still kind of have a soft spot for the army battles, even though they're not good. And I don't think the army battles are really good in any of them. Like Suikoden 2 is like bad Fire Emblem, where it's just pure RNG fest. Suikoden 5 is like an RTS. So I kind of have a soft spot for the army battles. How do you guys feel about them?
I do too. I like Suikoden 2 is like particularly bad when it comes to like how it functions. But man, I just really enjoy them. I also really like the fact that they all serve as like an alternative way of visually portraying how the story plays out. They're basically like mildly interactive cutscenes. But I like, as like a gamer, someone trying to enjoy gameplay, I don't think any of them are good. I agree with you. But as like a Suikoden fan, I like all of them.
Yeah, I think in one, it's just a glorified rock, paper, scissors that you can heavily rig in your favor. 2, I will say, at least in 2, it feels as though your random characters that are just quote unquote army generals at least matter a little bit more. Like it was always weird to me as a kid that someone like Gilbert in 2 wasn't a playable character, but then he would lead an army unit. I was just like, well, if you can use a sword, like why can't I just put you in my party? I don't really understand what's happening. But at least he feels a little bit more consequential. Whereas in 1, if you have a character like that, it's they're just a face on the screen that you might click, you might not. So that part was always kind of fell a little bit flat. Like I think Warren is one of the last characters you recruit. He might be one of those examples. Vincent for sure isn't a fighting character in number 1, but he's in like the warrior battles. So that part felt a little disingenuous. My hot take is that 3 has the best army battle system, but we don't have to litigate that here.
I remember liking 3s, yeah.
Yeah, in general, I agree with. But 3s is just the most consequential. But again, we don't have to litigate that here. In general, I think Zach would echo most of my feelings. Like it's a fond thing from a Suikoden perspective, like Paul also said. But yeah, it's just like a rigged rock paper scissors game.
Yeah, I think for like the first few, it kind of bugged me that I felt like I had absolutely, like I could just do anything, and maybe I would win, maybe I wouldn't win, and that kind of annoyed me a little bit. Like the actual thing happening, I thought was fine. It was interesting to have like an intermission where you're doing something different, but the like randomness of it, I was not so keen on. But then as the story moves on and you get kind of more classes that you can use that do different kinds of things, then it became a bit more interesting. But I think out of the ones I've played, it's probably my least favorite for the war battles, just because it seems kind of too sort of random, I guess.
Yeah, I would echo your thoughts there, Rob. Like, in particularly for the first 1 or 2 army battles, feel like brutally random, and also like come with like consequences of like losing progress and having to watch cutscenes over because they don't autosave before them for some reason. Like for example, like the first army battle is like when after like the elf village has been burned down. And you have to like do an army battle. You don't really have much options in terms of like support yet. So like you can't, you're actually like just, there's no way you could like get to that point where you can like break in and have some sort of like strategy in terms of like seeing it through that you can later on. It's like another case of like the game having like recruitment like be like come with like quality of life upgrades that you kind of just have to like tough it out beforehand. But then yeah, after that first army battle, you have to like do like a little bit of a level, and then you have to do like a duel, like the first duel in the game, and like that's all like without a save point. And like that first duel again, like I lost like 1 or 2 times because that also feels extremely random. I get like that the voice lines are supposed to help you like determine like what the opponent's next attack is going to be, and like duels are also kind of a rock paper scissors type format. But while they kind of work that way well in from what I've seen in Suikoden 2, in Suikoden 1, the voice lines you get and the way they are correspond with like a certain attack just feel completely random for the most part, and I was not able to like do that without a guide. I think like I ended up doing a couple of duels with a guide just because I didn't want to lose any more progress and do sections over again.
Yeah. So in terms of the duels, it's interesting that you say that, because like it's definitely way better now than it used to be on that front in terms of understanding what it is.
Even just punctuation has gotten better.
Yeah. But it's funny because you have that duel with Pawn and Tio that you need to win to get the true ending, and to keep, Pawn from dying. Although, he could die. It's fine. But
yeah, I let Pawn die. It's not worth it.
But like, it's interesting because I played it on hard mode, and for the most part, hard mode is whatever. Like the zombie dragon, when you're getting the castle, I thought was a really hard fight in hard mode. And because in Suikoden 1, you can't break things the way that you can in Suikoden 2. Like, Suikoden 2, like if you have the right rune set up, like you can just obliterate everything. But because you only have 1 rune slot here, you don't have much. But I felt the pain on hard mode Pawn versus Tio the most. Like, and I had to reload that like 4 times because even if you get the exact right things, like if it doesn't fall out the right way, you're just screwed.
That's a great
because he
call.
just hits you so hard. So yeah, but I think that like I kind of like that there's that sort of push pull difficulty of those. And there's a little bit of randomness to the duels, whereas I agree with you on the army battles.
I was just gonna say for that pawn one, oh my god, I tried it like a couple times, and like first like pawn just got absolutely crushed because I didn't level him at all, and then like I leveled him up, I like upgraded his equipment, I tried it again without a guide, got absolutely crushed again. Then I leveled him a bit more and tried it again with a guide, making sure I did every single option right, and I still ended up losing it, and I'm like, sorry,
Woof.
pawn, you are dead. I don't care.
I actually found it really not bad. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what happened. I mean, I had spoiled myself a little bit, so I knew it was coming. So I had been using him in my party for a while, so he was decently leveled and everything. But I'm pretty sure I just did it the first time, and it was fine.
I think this is one of those times. I'm guessing you were playing on hard mode, right, Aleks?
For one, actually, I did normal. Yeah.
Oh, even then you got bodied.
I might have just got bad
that,
RNG.
Yeah.
Just zipped up. God,
that's too bad.
That's a tough scene. Just as another random aside, I'm sorry because I'm full of these with Suikoden. For the first like probably 5 playthroughs, I thought that pawn dying was canon. Like I thought that was like I thought he had to die until I started figuring out that the guides existed, and I was just like, oh my god, you can win that fight. Sick.
I actually genuinely don't know the answer to this question, but can you get the true ending, 108 star ending if pawn dies? I don't think you can.
I don't
you?
think so.
No.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. Okay, well, we've bounced around a lot on this episode, and that's totally fine. But one thing I want to talk about a little bit is anything that we actually think is better in Suikoden 1 as opposed to some of the other games in the series. And I know we've done a lot of comparison here. And one thing I want to pick on is I actually think that Barbarossa is an excellent villain. I think that like sort of the whole backstory of Barbarossa is really interesting. I think that really like when you're talking about like shades of gray in the series, I think that this game in some ways captures that really well. Whereas like you've got someone like Barbarossa who has this sort of tragic backstory, and obviously he is losing touch a little bit with what he is, what sort of how he became a leader. And then if you compare him to someone like Luca Blight, who's just this force of nature, and obviously Luca's an amazing character, but he's like such an evil that like it's very clear. And obviously the shades of gray element becomes really important in the last third of that game. But I don't know. I think that is one thing in this game that I really hold up as being like an excellent thing, even in like sort of the scope of the rest of the series.
Can I ask a question? Is Barbarossa the villain?
I mean, Wendy probably is, right? But I mean, like in terms of an antagonist, I guess.
Yeah. Sorry, that might be just semantics, but I feel like Wendy is for sure the quote unquote villain. I do think it's definitely accurate to call Barbarossa an antagonist, but maybe I'm just splitting hairs.
Yeah, I mean, like Wendy is like a powerful individual, like ability wise or whatever. But the assumption throughout the whole game is that he too is affected by the Black Rune that takes over the minds of the generals. But at the end, he says, "No, like I'm not. You can't use True Rune powers on me because of the Sovereign Rune that's in my sword." And so the whole time, I mean, the dude was just enabling. Either allowing or enabling this evil person to do the evil things that she's doing using his authority. So like, yeah, he's a villain. He's not the villain.
That's fair.
And he says basically like, I wasn't really manipulated or anything. You just look like my ex-wife and I love you. And that's a really shitty reason to like let your empire go to shit. But I would call him a villain. He just not like menacing like other villains are,
Yeah, and I do think that makes him better. Yeah.
Yeah, because Luca Blight's like, I mean, it would be really hard to create any nuance there. There's like 3 lines where he talks about how you're not my dad, and it's just like, all right, but I mean, you're also running around yelling about people being pigs and making them crawl around. So
Anybody else have anything else they like kind of thought that this game did maybe better than some of the others, out of curiosity?
I don't think so. No. I think like there's a lot about it that is good, but when I think about the game compared to other ones that I've played in the series, I don't think there is any aspect to it that I think it does better than any of the others.
I think that what it does better is all the other games are like beautiful and colorful, and a lot of the stuff that happens is a little more lighthearted than it would feel like in reality. And I think that you could kind of say the same about the events of 1, but not for the same reason. I think 1 is a darker game. 1 is a more sad game, and I think that it portrays that darkness and that sadness, I think, maybe better than Suikoden 2 does, or really any of the other games. But it's just kind of working with not a whole lot of resources in terms of like script and events and stuff like that. So it's it could feel worse. It could feel more oppressive. It could feel more sad. But I think with what it has, I think it does better at portraying like how it would feel to be in that situation better than maybe 2 does.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning about the speed of the story. Like, I imagine if I'd played Suikoden 1 when it originally released, before I'd played any of the other games, I think my feelings probably towards the story especially would probably be more positive than they are. Even though they are positive, I think I would probably feel slightly different. I think like I enjoyed the story, but I think if it was given a little bit more time in places to kind of cook a bit more, then I think it would give me the same kind of emotional impact that I would want from it, that I'm not really getting from it as it is at the moment.
Yeah, I don't want to go so far as to say better with my limited knowledge of the series, but something that I do think the game pulled off pretty well is just like its setup and how that ends up supporting everything that follows, despite like flaws in execution in a lot of ways that we've been discussing. But like just that first like opening hour when you're in the Imperial City, like you're supposed to be like aligned with the goals of the Imperial City at first, before you start seeing like bits of corruption. You meet all the generals kind of like in their homes and things before like they become like your opponents. That ended up with like all the kind of minimalist economical storytelling. It does work surprisingly well in terms of like meeting them again like on the battlefield as enemies, and them feeling like kind of more full characters because of that. Like again, I'm still early on in Suikoden 2, but like Luca Blight's generals, like I don't care about those characters as much as I did like the generals in this game. And I think it's because that first hour of the game set up everything really well. And like in terms of like that switcheroo of like the Imperial Army first being like the thing you're supposed to be aligned with, and then becoming like the thing that you're fighting against. So again, it's just like another element of this game, like despite its flaws, like having some pretty cool ideas at the time in terms of like how it wants its story to unfold, even though like the payoffs aren't always there fully.
Yeah, and I think that I think it makes like that the fact that the final dungeon is in Gregminster. I think that really makes that moment pop really well. Like I really love what they do with the music when you get back to Gregminster as well. I think it's
super
really stunning.
Creepy.
It's just like sort of like this hollowed out version of the Gregminster theme, which is one of my favorites in the series still. And yeah, so I think that it feels like it feels like it sort of like bookends itself in ways that it needs to still for me work in ways that I think there's a messiness that sort of like progressively happens throughout the rest of the series, whereas like the tightness of the narrative here only is pulled off because of that. I think the opening hour, and I think you're totally right about that, and the way they pull it back, I think is really, really brilliant.
I have a couple of nominations for like favorite this or favorite that in the series, or like, a top something in the series, but I don't know if I would go so far as to say that like Rob alluded to, like that this game does anything, better than anything else. Again, like there's one or two moments that stand out, or maybe one or two characters, one way or the other, but probably not a whole system of things. Like this game probably has the best true rune, right?
I think it's the most interesting one. Yeah.
Like the Soul Eater slaps.
Yeah, and it's sort of
hard.
the generator of the tragic feeling of the game, and it's that this teenager is destined to like his presence almost ensures misfortune for the people that are close to him, and when you are a true rune bearer, you live forever. And so like the Soul Eater was cool because it was like every time you experience joy from human connection, just know that that's going to end bad. And so that's, I think you're right about that. And I never really thought about that, but I agree. I think the Soul Eater is probably the coolest true rune in the game or in the series.
And then for my money, like the 2 or 3 minutes where you see, like, you control Futch, and then you see Futch go down, and then you realize,
that's so cool,
right? Like, well, and then so like and how they handle his story there, and him losing, his best friend, and like the loss of an animal like that. Like there really isn't another moment like that in the series. And then the payoff that happens for those of us that get all the way to 3, like the payoff of Futch's character and his kind of return to Dragon Knighthood is, for my money, one of the cooler threads. And next time I got a couple of things to get off my chest, some takes about some things that they don't do well enough from 2 to 3 that I've kind of let cook for the last few years. But I'll leave those for now and just focus on, I think probably has the best true rune. And then the moment between Futch and Black, and how, kind of like Aleks said earlier, how they set that up in the beginning, and then they revisit that, and then there's this kind of emotional payoff, which we've suggested doesn't happen in 1 as many times as they might have tried to make it. Would be probably one of those are the 2 things that jumped out to me as sort of what this game does, quote unquote, best.
The like setup and payoff from 1 is something that it like establishes a like a pattern that happens like series wide. It's not necessarily like, the beginning of 2 does that at the end, or the beginning of 3 does that at the end, but just like as the series grows, the seeds that are planted do too, in a broader, more general sense. And so that's like it's a good observation. Like, I'm glad that you said that, because I think that because you noticed that in the first game, you're going to notice it even more in the series, and you're really going to enjoy that.
And I'll just say that, like, another thing I ended up kind of enjoying about this game, which is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, I really like hard strategic, like turn-based combat, and this game isn't that, like, at all. But what I actually got some joy out of was just throwing on auto battle and seeing like my sprites do cool animations in combat, and just getting through all the encounters like that. Like, it's not super rewarding, but it was kind of just like, it gave the game some of its own distinct character, honestly, and like it made it pace pretty well without too many hitches, and I kind of ended up enjoying that in the long run.
That probably deserves to be just a quick shout out. Like, one of the things that they did well in the remaster is that auto battle just keeps going. You don't have to keep resetting it every turn. And that's a good quality of life bump.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's sort of like the whole flavor of the game, right? Like the whole flavor is like move, and that works to its detriment, as we've talked about. But I also think that is sort of, to me, it's what defines it. And when the series moves too far away from that, I think that it struggles. And I think that, we've talked maybe too much about the rest of the series today, but I think like the first 10 hours of 5 or all of 3, like to me, when it moves away from that, it struggles. But I think that even though we have jumped around a lot today, we have covered a lot of what this game does well and what it doesn't do well. And sort of what it establishes and sort of how it sort of lives on its own. And so while I know it's been a bit of a messy conversation in terms of moving around, I think that you guys have done a great job of really digging into the different elements of it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a few times over the last hour and a bit, where it's like, man, we're really jumping around a lot. But I also think it's part of what makes Suikoden so interesting, because this first, quote unquote, first game sets up so many other things that we've suggested, but then chronologically, it's in the middle of the 5.5. So it almost seems natural in some ways that we would jump around, because there are so many things that get kind of like a spider crack out of it. But yeah, it has been a fun conversation. But I agree that it's kind of interesting to be ping ponging so far back and forth.
Yeah, and next week, which will allow us to move on to that. Next week, I think that we'll probably be a little bit more focused on the game itself, because we don't have to kind of talk through, sort of what the series is from a broad perspective, and also Suikoden 2 is, one of the greatest games ever made. So, and this game is, and I think that it's fair to evaluate it on its own, but it's also fair to evaluate it as a template for what comes after. So, as I said, speaking of that, next week, or not next week, 2 weeks from now, we will be discussing Suikoden 2. That'll be another revisited episode. You can go back and listen to the game journals for those as well. Those are some of my favorite game journal episodes. They're fantastic. I'm really sad they happened right before I joined the site. And then after that, we're going to stay in the 90s for a little while. And we're going to have an episode on the top 10 RPGs of the 1990s. We've had a lot of other top 10 lists. We did a Super Nintendo one, a PS1 one, and this one's going to sort of blend those together. But I thought, it's a retro podcast. I think it's interesting. There are so many great games in the 90s that as I'm putting my list together, it's like having to leave some of your favorite children behind. It's like a Sophie's Choice. It's killing me. But I'll get there. And then after that, we're going to go in a very different direction. A different direction for me too, is we're going to have game journals. So 2 episodes on Fallout New Vegas, which I'm extremely excited to dig into. And you should thank Aleks for suggesting I put it on the poll for us to play, which is, the winner, and it won by a lot. So I'm excited to dig into it. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us retro@rpgfan.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, Blue Sky, Twitch, and YouTube. We're usually RPG Fan or RPG Fancom. And all those places. You can also get in touch with us on Discord. A number of us on this episode are on the Discord as well. If you want to support us, there are 2 different ways you can do that. We have a shop hosted by TeePublic, which has mugs, t-shirts, things like that if you want to rep RPG Fan. Or you can purchase our review card collection from Hyperplay RPG. It has 300 review cards that you may have seen on Instagram. It's very cool. We also have 2 other podcasts, Random Encounter, which is usually about things that are current and usually of games that we're playing right now. And then Rhythm Encounter, which is the other Monday of every other Monday about RPG music. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify. If there are podcasts there, however you listen to us, you can probably rate us there. And if you want to give us individual feedback, let's talk about how to get in touch with the panelists, starting with you, Aleks.
You can email me at alexfraniczek@gmail.com.
And Rob.
I'm on Blue Sky, Neon Cowboy.
And Kyle.
Sorry, I forgot Rob was Neon Cowboy. That's amazing. I'm Blue Sky, Kyle RC89, and Twitter, not X, Twitter is at Kyle RPG Fan.
And Paul.
You can email me at pdennis89@gmail.com.
Perfect. And if you want to get in touch with me, probably that retro email is just as good as my RPG Fan email, which is just zachw@rpgfan.com. But I also am sometimes, not often, on our Discord as ZachW. And if you DM me there, I'll see it eventually. So thank the 4 of you so much for this conversation that kind of went all over the place, and I kind of expected that a little bit, and it kind of looked at this game from like a micro perspective, but also sort of on the macro scale of the whole series. And I thought that you guys had a lot of really interesting things to say, no matter what your experience levels were. And so thank you, panelists, and thank you, listeners. Good night and good luck.